Welcome to the TCU Innovates podcast.
For over 150 years, Texas Christian University has been at the forefront of innovation, and we're just getting started.
I'm TCU Chancellor Victor Bashini.
And I'm TCU President Daniel Pullen.
We are your hosts of TCU Innovates.
Here, we highlight the latest stories of innovation and thought leadership across our community.
Dream big, be bold,
and lead on, Horned Frogs. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to our all-new podcast. This actually marks my first episode for TCU Innovates, and I am excited to visit with the one and only Mike Scott, who serves Texas Christian University as our Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment, which is an all-important function and task that annually marks the continuation of our student body. Mike, thanks for being here on the show with us today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
All right. You know, I don't mess around, so let's jump right in. So tell me, how did you become a Horned Frog?
Well, you know, I actually started at TCU as a transfer student back in 1980. I came in as a sophomore transfer. I knew about TCU my entire life. I grew up in the Disciples Church, so I had spent summer camps and things like that for pretty much my entire life around TCU. So I came in as a student in 1980, graduated, left for a while, and ended up coming back to work for TCU full time in I think it was 1988. And we were talking just a minute ago that as a lot of people you will meet at TCU, I came in thinking I'd stay here for a couple of years, maybe get a master's degree, then decided, to decide what I want to do when I grow up after that. And that was 36 years ago, and I'm still here.
Fantastic. Well, you made a big mark here, and we're doing a podcast today, so I know that one of your degrees is in radio and film, so to be old hand at this. But it sounds to me like TCU's been a really great decision for you, and you've certainly contributed so much. I know it was my honor, along with Chancellor Bashini, this year to award you and your wife, Karen, who's the director of our international admissions program, with the joint TCU Impact Award. Tell us a little bit about that moment.
Well, yeah. First, I'd have to say, if you ask anything about my accomplishments at TCU, meeting Karen has got to be, right up there at the top. I'd have to say that. We started, interestingly enough, we found out later, by the way, that Karen and I were both here as students at the same time. Huh. And we never knew each other. We didn't meet until I came back. Probably the seminal event of my being here that ultimately got me interested in the bigger picture and moving into the overall enrollment area was a program that Dr. Bashini started after he came to TCU. He had hosted, some of you know what an ACE fellow is, where these are generally, I think, deans, provosts, that level at another university who are interested in being presidents, and they come and spend a year mentoring or being mentored by a sitting president or chancellor. And Dr. Bashini had done that, thought that it was a pretty good idea and enjoyed it. But then he started thinking, I guess, why not do that for someone internally instead of bringing someone in from the outside? So I spent 2 years on the cabinet following the chancellor around. And that sort of did it. That was what got me really motivated to make TCU, to stay at TCU the remainder of my career, and to try to take over more of a leadership role within the entire division.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like, your commitment to lifelong learning through your executive MBA, your willingness to step up and participate in advanced leadership opportunities kind of gives you the skill set and experience to be, an outstanding steward of the resources that we're entrusted. A lot of those resources in the spirit of attracting the best and brightest students to enroll here, and the spirit of maintaining a commitment to not only excellence but access really involves scholarships and financial aid. And that business acumen and that experience in higher education, no doubt, allows us to continue to be relevant and yield and really propel some of the most amazing young minds of any university in the country. So let's talk numbers a little bit. How much financial aid does TCU award each year?
When I ask people that question frequently, just to see the look on their face when I tell them the answer, because the common reply is $10 million, maybe, something like that. I took a quick look before I came over this morning of just for this year, this current year so far, the aid office has distributed in total, now this is from everything, from federal, state, institutional, everything, over $400 million
Wow.
in financial assistance this year. Some of that are student loans. Some of that, a little bit of it's work study, but the majority of that is grant and scholarship, or what we call gift aid. The more important number, I think, in there is that over $300 million of that is money that TCU provides. Most of the money that comes from the federal government and the state is from the loan programs, not from grant funding. TCU's 300 some odd million is all gift aid.
Yeah, which is, in many cases, the best kind.
Absolutely.
From the perspective of a student and their family and support network. I know that scholarships have always been a priority here, but last fall when we celebrated the successful completion of our $1 billion Lead on Capital campaign, scholarships rose directly to the top of the list, and I'm just so proud to see our ability to ensure that students who have outstanding academic credentials and or financial need, that access to the world-class degree at TCU is quite achievable. Right. And that's had really everything to do with our success. If you read the popular press and people are talking about the cost of college and, what some of the trends are, and I want to get to that in a second, sometimes you hear this word called discount rate. What does that mean really, and how does that impact our enrollment strategy here at TCU?
That's a really good question. Discount rate is something that the financial aid director, obviously, and an enrollment manager keeps a very close eye on. But the discount rate at an institution is basically the percentage of their tuition revenue that they forfeit or that they give back to students in the form of scholarships and grants. And at the risk of getting too far in the weeds, within the discount rate, though, what's important within that overall number is what we call the funded discount versus the unfunded discount. Funded discount is exactly what you just referred to. That comes from the endowment. That comes from gifts where donors give us money and say, here's my gift. I'd like to endow this scholarship for students in the radio department at TCU. And that's what we do with that money. We give it for scholarships. It's donor designated. Other pieces of the discount are not funded, so they're coming out of general revenue. So what that means is that every dollar that you put into financial aid is a dollar you can't do something else with, like buy equipment or build buildings or hire faculty, what have you. So it's a very delicate balance to manage the discount to make sure you're providing access to as many students as possible, but also not impacting the operational budget or the ability of the university to operate. That's, in essence, what the discount is.
I've been here about 5 years now, and given the importance of your role, you were one of the very first people I sought out to really understand, our strategy and the nuances of what you and your team does. And I'll never forget, in that first meeting, you said to me, schools with higher discount rates are doing that for only one of two reasons. What are those two reasons for our listeners?
Yeah, this is something I love to share, remind people. Schools have high discount rates for one of two reasons, because they can or because they have to. From a student perspective, it's a little blurry, because from a student perspective, you would think, well, I'd rather go to a school with a really high discount rate because that means they give away more money. So I might get a larger financial aid award rather than this other school maybe that discounts at a lower rate. Some schools discount at a very, very high rate because that's the only way they can attract students to come to the university. And that's good for the student in that they may have gotten a nice scholarship, but then you look at the university and you see maybe their fiscal plan is suffering or their classrooms aren't up to date or whatever. And that's generally because they are spending so much of their revenue just on financial aid. So it helps the students on one side, but then they suffer on the other side by not getting the quality that they might expect from that university. TCU is in an enviable position in that we have made considerate incremental increases to our discount over the last 10, 15 years that were very strategic, very well thought out, and we did that because we could. We weren't forced into doing that. We did not have to do that to make our class or to attract students to TCU. We could do it because we had the resources to do that, and because that then enabled us to sort of mold or shape a class that meets the institutional's enrollment goals.
I get it. And, to be in a position of being deliberate, and choosing a course of action versus reacting to something that's been thrust upon you has had a great deal to do with the rising aptitude and aspirations of our student body over the years. You mentioned earlier a comment about how over time we've been increasing as a percentage of our enrollment students from lower and middle economic statuses. And I think that's valuable as we prepare, and not just educate, but prepare leaders for society, regardless of background and starting point. Sometimes, though, when you have a tuition rate of, say, X level, parents and others have questions about the cost of higher education in general, and specifically higher education at a private university like TCU. What's your approach to that?
It can be a difficult conversation with some families, and we get that. We talk a lot on both the admissions and the financial aid side about what the university is doing to provide access. When you talk about, going back just a second there to the discount rate, what you're really talking about from a student perspective, where that comes into play, is what's actually going to be the net cost, not the sticker price, if you will. I hate to use that. I hate that term, but it's true. It's what are you actually going to pay, and does that fit in within not only your budget but your value decision of what you want out of a college? Over the last 10 years, tuition has gone up something a little over 47%, which is a lot, but the financial aid budget has grown at something like 170%. So we've been able to keep up with and outpace, or at least, make great strides towards keeping that access realistic for most students. I mentioned earlier, I've been here 36 years. I honestly, maybe it has happened and I've just forgotten, but I don't remember a year in 36 years that we didn't increase the financial aid budget at least the percentage that we increased tuition. Yeah. So that has been a great thing.
What I think many in higher ed are struggling with is some of the changes to the mechanisms to be eligible for that need-based aid. And we have these acronyms called FAFSA and CSS. Talk to us about what each of those items are, and then what are some of the changes that we're seeing?
The FAFSA is the federal financial aid application. It's the free application for federal student aid. The information provided in the FAFSA is what the federal government says universities must use to determine eligibility for federal financial aid programs. And that means basically the Pell Grant, College Work Study is a federal program, and the federal loan programs. So the feds say, here's our money that you can offer in financial aid, and here's how you will determine who gets it. And by the mechanism to kick that off is the FAFSA. Behind the scenes on the FAFSA, what families don't really know is a very complicated methodology that looks at many different variables in a family situation, not just their income. Assets come into play, the number of family members, the state you live in, the age of the older parent. All of those things can impact the ultimate outcome of what the FAFSA says, or the FAFSA process says this family is eligible or able to pay. It gets a little convoluted. Sometimes the result, I will tell you this, when a family gets the results of the FAFSA that says theoretically we think you should be able to contribute or pay this much, in the 36 years I've done this, I've never once, not one single time, had a family sitting at my desk look at that number and look up at me and go, yeah, that looks about right. I think that I can pay that. No one agrees with the results of the FAFSA, and we get that. We get that. Every financial aid officer in every school in the country gets that. So that's what the FAFSA does. And at many universities, that's all you do is the FAFSA. We have a second form, and a lot of schools like TCU also use this, called the CSS profile. CSS means the College Scholarship Service. And this is something that's put out and managed through the College Board, the same people that do AP and the SAT. Whereas the FAFSA is based on what we call federal methodology, which is determined by Congress and interpreted and enacted by the Department of Education. The profile uses a similar methodology. We call it institutional methodology, but it is created and maintained by volunteer financial aid directors all over the country working with the College Board. It might not come as a surprise to you to know that some people think that maybe we could actually do a little bit better job than the government in determining what your financial situation is and what the reality is for your family. So schools that require you to file a CSS profile are using that for their institutional money, just their own money. Well, you know, I was talking about those big numbers earlier. In the undergraduate class this year, the federal grant money that they received was a little over $6 million. From the state of Texas, they received maybe $3.5 million. From TCU, they received about $250 million. Wow. Okay, so it wouldn't surprise you to know that in managing our $250 million, we might want to look at this a little differently. So the profile just it asks some additional questions that are not on the FAFSA. It enables schools to tweak the methodology, even to customize it a little bit to make it appropriate for their students and for the area of the country they're in, or various other things. And the results are what we use to determine eligibility for our own funding. So yeah, it's a little bit of a hassle. You have to file 2 forms, but it does give a much better picture of the family's ability to pay and our way of interpreting that in order to help as many people as possible.
So, we're going to wrap up here in a second, but I'd be remiss if I didn't go back to the theme of our podcast, which is all about innovation and dreaming big. So let's close with one last question. Mike, what is your big dream for TCU?
I tell people in leadership positions at TCU, from what I do, now there are lots of different ways to look at this, but from an enrollment perspective, what sets TCU apart maybe from some of those aspirant schools that we might look at is that those schools are able to meet the need, 100% of the need of all the students who apply. And we do a great job at meeting a lot of need, but we don't meet all of the need. And to continue to build the endowment, to build the resources that we need, which would enable us to say to a student, if we admit you and you come to TCU, whatever that need is that you determine or that we determine from this financial aid process that's so crazy, we're going to meet that need with gift aid out of that gift bucket. And I think when we get to the point where we can do that for, if not all, certainly the majority of our students, that will set us apart greatly, or to a great extent. The other piece of it that I really want to see is when Chancellor Bashini first got here, one of the first things he started talking about was retention and looking at retention. And we had not done a lot, quite honestly, or back in those days. And so he got a group of us, he asked me to chair it, and we started looking at what was TCU's retention, how does that compare nationally, where can we go? And at the time, I think we were 82%, an 82% retention rate, which was dead solid average for a school like TCU. And of course, Chancellor Bashini is not real happy being average, so he charged us with increasing that. And as most of you know, this past year it was 94%. That is incredible. That's something that we probably don't brag about enough. That puts you in rarefied air when you're an institution that has a 94% retention rate. So my dream also is to see that not stop, and to see it continue into the Project 90 and getting the graduation rate even higher than it is. And a piece of that will be taking the finance concern out of that. So if you're able to meet need, those will go very well hand in hand.
Yeah, well, it's a great testament to the progress that's occurred, but also the lack of complacency as we set our sights even higher. Well, you've certainly set the standard, Mike, over the years. Cannot thank you enough for your leadership. And thanks for joining me on my first podcast.
Thanks.
And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. We'll catch you next time, and go Frogs. The TCU Innovates podcast is recorded at the KTCU studio in the Bob Schieffer College of Communications at Texas Christian University. Thank you to our student producer, George Kamar, and the entire KTCU team for supporting our show. Go Frogs!